But I do think you're forced to maybe you have to use a little bit more descriptive language if you're asked how you're really doing.
Yeah.
You have to do a little bit of a deeper dive.
Right. So I just was like, it's kind of brilliant and super easy. Hello and welcome to the Sunshine Parenting Podcast, where we talk about ideas for raising kids who become thriving adults, and we also talk about being thriving adults ourselves. I'm your host, Audrey Monkey. Here on the podcast, I share my experiences parenting 5 now adult kids and working with thousands more as a summer camp director for the past 4 decades. I'm the author of Happy Campers, and I love sharing encouragement and ideas for living more positive, connected lives. Topics I researched extensively for my master's in psychology and continue to explore today. I created this podcast as a place to share what I've learned and to encourage us all to raise and be thriving adults. Well, hello, Sunshine Parenting listeners. It's me, Audrey, and I'm back doing a new podcast recording for the first time since last July. And I was compelled to do the recording for 2 reasons. One, I have some stuff that I've learned that I'm just dying to pass along. And secondly, my daughter, Gretchen, is here with me, and she agreed to have a conversation with me. So welcome, Gretchen. Why don't you introduce yourself for listeners who haven't heard you on one of our previous episodes?
Hi, I'm so happy to be here today, and hopefully I'll get to join in the future. I taught high school and middle school English for 5 years, and now I'm working full-time for Gold Arrow Camp, and I'm also getting a doctorate at Fresno State in educational leadership, and I'm about halfway through the program, and I just started the dissertation process. And for my dissertation, I am going to be looking at how working at a residential summer camp, impacts or informs the teaching experience. So how teachers or what teachers learn from working at camp. So a lot about connection and just how they bring that into their classroom and how that has a positive impact on their students and their experience as a teacher. And I also became a parent this year. So this fall, I've just learned a lot about being a mom and navigating my first few months of motherhood.
Yes, and because you became a mom, I became a grandma. So I'm. Do I need to rename the whole podcast? Sunshine Grandparenting? No, I think we'll just stick with this, but you can be the next generation and help me with the parenting of today. So earlier, Gretchen and I were talking about some staff training for this summer. And one of the things that we were talking about is so many different people do trainings at camp. So like the waterfront director is training the boat drivers, and somebody else is training group counselors on how to run a campfire. And there's all these different distinct trainings. But one thing we were talking about being very important is that every leader who's running a training always sets out at the beginning of the training with an objective. So I'm going to take that advice for this podcast episode and let you all know that our purpose and objective for this particular episode is to share some connection ideas. And I'm hoping that at least one of the things that you hear today, you'll grab onto and try this month or this year. And hopefully it'll bring some closer connections along the way, whether it's with your family or friends or at work. So I think it's funny because as we were just talking and thinking about this topic, I think almost everything I do is related to connection.
Everything. Parenting, teaching, being a camp director.
Yeah, it's all either making connections or helping other people make connections. Is sort of that, I don't know. So yeah, it's kind of crazy. So I have been very interested in it. I wrote a lot of things in my book, but I've continued to keep learning new things. So a couple things that I've learned recently, and I started writing a blog post yesterday, and I realized that nobody reads blog posts anymore. So I thought maybe I'll just take my outline for my blog post and just do a quick podcast episode, and but I didn't want to do it alone. I have my buddy Gretchen here because it helps me a lot. I do better in community, in connection. I like being with someone whose ideas we resonate. So we're going to do this little dive into connection. Hope you get some good tips from it. So to start with, one of the reasons that I feel like connection is so important is because we are experiencing an epidemic of loneliness. It is pretty bad, and I think it was bad before the pandemic, and it was bad during the pandemic, and it's bad coming out of the pandemic, post-pandemic, whatever you say. A lot of the habits and practices that have made our life more convenient, and more online, I guess you would say, have led to people feeling more disconnected and more lonely from other people.
And a lot more people are working remotely. And I think I was talking to my father-in-law, and he was mentioning that they had Zoom connection meetings, or they had, kind of Zoom happy hours, but it's just not the same as meeting in person. And I've kind of learned that as well. Last year I was in person teaching, and it was so fun to be back in the classroom after about a year and a half of working remotely and teaching remotely. And it was just so fun to have coworkers and to celebrate birthdays together and to go out for dinner on Fridays and watch students play sports and all of that fun stuff. And so that's one thing I miss about not being in the classroom this year is I'm home, and connection has to be much more intentional and planned because most of the time I'm just home with my baby.
Yep. Which is a lovely blessing to get to do that. But it is true. And I think another episode we're going to do is something on that topic of how, as a new parent, you can get the connection that you need, whether it's finding other new parents to go on walks with. And you've done a lot of things very intentionally to make sure you're keeping your connection, because you're a person who likes to be with people.
Yes.
And babies are great, but they don't really respond to your conversations as well as an adult.
And this, I think this could be another episode as well, but I just, in the past couple of years, I got married, I moved to a new city. A lot of my college friends and the people that I spent a lot of time with before aren't nearby. And so in addition to having a baby, I feel like I've had to learn a lot about meeting new people as an adult. Mm-hmm. And it's much harder than meeting people organically when you go to college or you start a new program or go to a new school, when you're just in a new area all by yourself.
Yeah, it's a lot of work.
It's more work.
Yeah, it's even like how dating is a lot of work.
Yes.
Like, you have, friends who are dating, and it's just like it's like almost another job. It's like you really have to put effort into it. It's like these days you really could go a long time without meeting anybody.
And the hard thing about whether you're trying to date or meet a friend is usually that first conversation you're craving that deep, rich connection where you know someone really well and you can have these heart-to-hearts, but you don't get that right away. And so you have to be in this uncomfortable space for a while in order to try to get that deeper connection.
For sure. That's so good. It reminds me, well, a whole nother topic. But our Shasta Nelson thing that we went to, where she talks about how it's this consistency and time, and as time goes on, increasing vulnerability. And you really don't get there with that many people in life because it takes so long to get to that point where you're really sharing all that kind of deep stuff.
Yeah.
But along the way, we all move in life, and you have to, each time you move, figure out some community and connection wherever you are. So here's some ways, actually, and the things we're talking about today, I think will lend to that. So so recently, my friend Sarah, who's been on the podcast many times on the Salsa and Sunshine walk and talks that we had, she and I talk a lot about different things, and she recommended a book called The Art of Gathering by Priya Parker. And so I had some travel time, and I ended up binge listening to it over a 2-day binge and writing like copious notes about both what I learned and applications, like how for life. So one of the things that Parker talks about in the book is the importance of having a really bold, specific purpose every time you gather. So she talks about, I think a lot of us think about gatherings as like, oh, I'm hosting a dinner party or a wedding or a birthday. But she was talking about kind of every gathering we have. So if you're calling a meeting for 4 people at work, if you're having, I mean, you could even just go down as close as like family dinner with your family and whatever it might be. But what happens is we often just think of gatherings just, oh, we're just hanging out. We're just kind of being together, which that can be like, you can decide that this doesn't really have any purpose other than we're just going to hang together. Mm-hmm. But if you want it to be something that's like memorable and deeper, it takes some like planning, a little bit of planning and forethought. So one of the examples that I was thinking of, oh, she also talks about how sometimes we think a purpose is like, for example, celebrating a birthday, but she called that, I think she called it like a category. So it's like a type of gathering, but it's not really a purpose. And so, so one idea that I thought of, because we do a lot of this kind of stuff at camp and in our family too, is sort of like affirmations and that idea. But I was thinking that one idea of a birthday could be that we're going to gather for dinner to celebrate this person who's turning 30, and everyone's going to share one tip for like having an awesome decade.
I love that. And we did something, it wasn't a tip, but for a coworker's 30th birthday, it was right at the beginning of the pandemic, and we had a little Zoom lunch just to celebrate him. And we had in advance asked students who he had in previous years and who he currently had to send in little videos of how he positively impacted them as a teacher. And it made it a lot more memorable and special to gather for the purpose of sharing why you were appreciated at school or why we appreciate you. And not just, we're all going to sit and eat our lunches and chat and say we're meeting because it's a birthday.
Right. And sing happy birthday and be done. Yeah. And I have to say, there's another thing that Priya talks about that it really resonates with me, and you can relate to this, is it's awkward as the host of gatherings to sort of make the purpose happen. Like, for example, if you want to do something that I feel like is really important, like at our office birthday gatherings, it's really important, I think, for us to take a little time to celebrate the person and give them some affirmations. So to have everyone else in the group share. And people kind of hem and haw and like sort of make it, whatever, kind of joke about it. But in the end, it ends up being a really positive thing, especially for the recipient, because it's nice to hear how people feel, because on a day-to-day basis, someone's not going to walk up to you and tell you some of the things they feel about you. So just this week, we celebrated your birthday at the office lunch. So how was that? And what were like, was that, I know it's kind of, is it embarrassing or how did it feel?
I think it's different for every person, but it is always nice to feel appreciated and to hear what other people see in you and affirm qualities they see. But it is funny, every time we've done a birthday, every time we've done that as a family or in the office, someone always kind of moans and groans. And I was thinking of Cameron, my now husband, when he was celebrating his first birthday with our family, he was like, please, can we not do the compliments, or I forget what he called it at the time, but he really was nervous about everyone saying something that they liked about him, and it made him a little bit anxious. But I think I forget what we ended up doing. Now he's totally used to it.
Did he, okay, so I don't really remember that, but yeah, but that's one of those things that I guess that actually leads to another thing that Parker talks about in the book is you can't just spring it on people. Uh-huh. So if you have a specific like thing that you're going to be doing that like leads to this purpose, you need to tell people ahead of time. So if you were doing this, like the example that I gave, it should say on the invitation, we're going to each share a tip for having a great 30s or something like that, so that people have time to think about it ahead of time and prepare. The recipient also needs to be forewarned. Like, hey, you're new to the family, you're new to the office. At our birthday lunches, this is a tradition we have.
And I think he's used to it now, but I think anytime, especially if you're not from a family or community that maybe goes around and shares, their response to a topic, or when there's more structured sharing, it's definitely something I think to get used to, which goes back to your point of when you're hosting something like this, it can be a little uncomfortable.
Yeah, I can't remember what she called it, but basically she said something about, like she talked a lot about how as a host, the responsibility of, for example, making sure people are introduced to each other. Like that was a
Yes.
good example of something that you can say you're just being chill and standing back. But what that means is that if you're having a gathering of people who don't all know each other, people will clump together with the people they know. Unless you as host intentionally create some kind of situation where people have a chance to meet other people, whether it's you have them paired for where they're sitting at dinner or you have something that you do. She told one story that I thought was kind of funny. And I mean, nobody, you have to be kind of brave to do something like this, but she was having somebody, I don't think it was her, it was somebody else, was having a party, like in an apartment in New York. And each time someone walked in the front door, the host was prepared to say, "Hey, everybody, want to make sure that you get a chance to talk to Gretchen. She's currently getting her doctorate in education, and I've known her since she was a baby," and whatever. Like it was just, but it was actually kind of very well thought through. And this is just a gathering of 10 or 12 people, so it wasn't it wasn't 50 people.
Yeah.
And it sounds odd, and a lot of people would be like, "Oh, why wouldn't want to do that?" But the host provided connection points because by saying some things about the person, other people can come up to you and say, "Oh, hi, Gretchen. I actually, got my doctorate. What are you getting yours in?" And, or whatever.
Yeah.
So, it reminded me also a lot of camp if counselors sit back and are just chill, so to speak, or teachers sit back and are just chill, that means that quiet people will not get folded in.
Yes.
It means that new people will not feel welcome.
Yeah.
You've got to have a plan for connection in whatever gathering you're having.
I was just thinking about a Christmas party I went to, and it was fun, and I'm a talkative person, but there were a lot of people there that I still didn't know at the end of the party, and it was probably a party of 30 people. So I should have probably met a few people. And I'm thinking we had a huge dinner. We easily could have had assigned seats and had maybe just figure out how, one thing about this person or I don't know, it doesn't have to be as if you're too embarrassed to do the intro through the door.
Right. That's extreme.
There might be some other ways to kind of make people connect.
Sure.
Or encourage connection.
I was also one of the kind of specific purposes I was thinking in terms of work, like a meeting would be something like a purpose could be sharing our projects for the next week and setting up accountability and encouragement partners. So that could look like pairing up and sharing, this is what I'm doing and how I want to be reminded or encouraged is, please, can you send me a text on Thursday morning and see how I'm doing? Something like that could be, so it doesn't have to be necessarily, that is connecting, I think, when you connect people at work to support each other or be accountability buddies. Another example that she gave that I also thought was good, and the holidays just passed, so maybe next year or whatever, but she was talking about how even with people at a holiday gathering, having the assignment of sharing a story that about yourself that you think others might not know or that others don't know or most of the people don't know, and as a way to get to know each other better, because I think it's almost harder sometimes with people you feel like well, like a group of close friends or your family, to get deeper, because sometimes you're just you just don't try as hard, I guess. So I thought that was interesting. And so then I think that was the main thing. So that was my first tip is to be, if you're the one organizing something, if you're inviting your friends over for a lunch, if you're meeting a friend for a walk, if you're whatever it is you're doing, think about a purpose that's specific. I think a really easy one is if you're meeting your friend, one friend for a walk or a few friends, say, hey, I'd love for us to share what's been going really well and what we're struggling with. That's something as simple as that. So that we all know, hey, the three of us are going for a walk. Let's make sure that everyone has a chance to share what's going well in their life and maybe something that we can support them with.
And I think one good thing about going into a walk with a purpose like that, especially if there are three people, sometimes when you're with 3 or 4 people, there usually is a person or maybe 2 people that tend to dominate the conversation or maybe are more inclined to share a lot more. And I know sometimes you can leave a space or leave an outing or activity and realize that you didn't share a lot, or maybe you overshared and didn't hear enough from the other person. So by having an objective or goal, we're all going to share. There's more of a plan.
Yeah, and it's actually like more likely to want to be repeated.
Yeah.
Because also if like the whole walk is just focused on like one person's problem, which sometimes you are gathering to support a person. Like maybe that's the purpose of the walk. Our good friend is going through a hard time. We're going for a walk and let's support her. That could be the purpose. But if that's not the specific purpose, but it becomes like every time that's what ends up happening, it just won't be a sustainable. And like you said, not everyone will leave feeling as connected. So yeah, that's a great example. So again, just to reiterate, have a bold, specific purpose every time you're gathering if you're the host. And I think what she called it was being a generous host. And it was almost like the way she described it is you're being a generous host by making sure that everyone is feeling welcome, connected, engaged. Like that's more generous than being the kind of host that just like makes sure there's plenty of food, but doesn't know if people have anyone to talk to.
Yes. And decor, I mean, this is coming from, and you probably feel the same way, but I'm not great with decor or kind of the aesthetics of a party. And there is value in that too. But I do think that people typically walk away and they remember, like we said, how they felt, or the conversations they had. Usually you don't remember as much about maybe the color scheme or...
Right.
I don't know.
Exactly. I know. Well, actually, speaking of a gathering that I just hosted, our anniversary New Year's party, my favorite part, of course, was when we did toasts.
Yes.
And I had my kids, I made you guys each do a toast. But so that's good. Okay. So tip number 2. So Greg McKeown, it's weird how it's pronounced because I always thought it was Greg McKeown, but it's Greg McKeown. And he wrote the books Essentialism and Effortless. And I love the book Essentialism. It's really good. He just talks about the importance of doing what's essential, knowing what's essential in your life, kind of living into your purpose. However, he has a podcast I really like and an episode that I recently listened to that was just, again, it's just like one of those, oh my gosh, this is so simple. And this is way, way more simple than the last one. You can do this one today without any effort. Instead of the common thing that we do is, hey, Gretchen, how are you?
Good.
Yeah. That's the kind of socially normal whatever, which in a lot of settings, maybe that's just fine, right? Like with people you don't know as well, or I don't know, whatever. But if you're wanting to actually connect or go slightly deeper with a person, he had 2 different suggestions. One was to just say, hey, Gretchen, so how are you really doing? How would you answer that question?
I would probably say I'm a little tired because I've been getting up more in the middle of the night.
Yep.
But I'm very happy and content. But I do think you're forced to maybe describe you have to use a little bit more descriptive language if you're asked how you're really doing.
Yeah.
You have to do a little bit of a deeper dive.
Right. So I just was like, it's kind of brilliant and super easy. So again, something that I think people can apply. The other thing that he shared, which I feel like is one of those things that has to be more, would be in a setting with people you know well, and it would be something that maybe in your family or something like that. But his thing was having a 3-part series of questions. So and he gave some different examples, but the questions were, so how are you doing just like on the surface? And like that, then you get to like, oh, feeling a little tired, but feeling pretty happy. So how are you doing in the middle? And like, that's like a little bit more like, oh, well, I'm a little, I don't know how you would answer that. I would say, like, for me, how am I doing on the surface? Right now, I feel super energized and happy because I'm talking to you. How am I doing in the middle? I'm good. I've been doing a lot of planning and churning about like the year and really kind of, like thinking a lot and journaling and, my brain's been really on fire. And how am I doing deep down? Deep down, I am feeling pretty like content and peaceful and I guess I don't know how deep that was. But anyway.
I know. I really like that. I was just wondering the difference between how are you doing in the middle and how are you doing deep down.
Yeah, I might have to re-listen to it.
Like, is deep down more of a spiritual...
Yeah.
On a spiritual level?
Maybe. I guess it could be like in the middle. Yeah, I guess it's just like on the surface, like if you just think your quick first thoughts.
Your gut
just
reaction.
How am I feeling just like right now in the moment?
Yes.
It could be on the surface, you could be hungry.
Yes.
You could be hot.
Yes.
You could be feeling tired. It's more like the surface stuff. In the middle, it could be more, what do you...
I don't know if this is how he interpreted it, but maybe middle is like, how are you doing this week?
Right. More
like,
short term. Yeah.
Like a short,
this month.
Short term, but
Good.
not immediate in the moment.
Yeah. Yes. That's
and
makes
then
sense.
Deep down is like really the past few months, if you're evaluating, how have you been feeling?
Right.
Right? Or
yeah.
no?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Is your deep down emotion like anxiety or is it, concern about something? Is it excitement about something? Is it, I guess it's, so anyway, so I guess we could rephrase it, but I think it could be a good thing to use in some form with like checking in with people. Like say you have, whether it's a friend or a family member or something that you're getting together with, you already know each other well. So you're comfortable kind of going deep fast. Mm-hmm. If you got into a routine of having it this way, well, okay, so how are you doing today? Well, how's this month been for you? And how are you really feeling? And what, like, overall, how are you feeling about your life right now?
Yeah.
Like, are you content with where you are? Or do you have big goals or whatever? Okay. So that was good. I think the how are you really doing is easier than the
trying to dissect
the surface
middle.
But the same point comes across that often we could be like, with someone we love, like our spouse or a really good friend, we could be saying, how are you? And maybe they say a one-word answer, like they could say, oh, busy or tired. But you rarely get much more than that. But if you at least ask more, you get more.
I'm wondering how we could change those questions for like, how was your day?
Yes.
Because a lot of people in the home,
you're right.
The same thing as like, how are you really doing?
Yeah.
You don't usually say, how are you doing? You usually say, how's your day going?
Right. Yeah. I guess, I was thinking, when you're with a friend, like it could be like a how are you doing deep down could be more like how are you feeling about your job right now? I guess that's a whole different question, but how are you feeling about, where you're living and your family and your whole life?
Just like where you're at in your life.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Or something like that.
Yeah.
Okay. So the final one is, it's a new old one because I've shared about this so many times before, but I think we just underestimate and don't use enough just the power of asking really great questions. And we can also provide great questions if we have the opportunity in a setting like something we talked about before. So at camp, and one of the things we talked about, and I have a little video on it that I'll share in a link to this, but we talk a lot about skills for making and keeping friends. And a super important skill is the ability to ask good questions and follow-up questions and obviously listen then to the response and respond appropriately when you ask questions. So I've talked a lot about this in the past. I wrote about it in my book, and I even provide like a resource that's like connection questions or something like that. So I love questions. We give them to counselors to use as ideas for getting to know campers. We put them on the tables so that campers can ask each other questions. So I'm a big fan of questions. They're good both for people who don't know each other and for people who do know each other. And it's funny because the questions we have on the table at camp, I'll be sitting at a table with the maintenance staff, and they'll whip out a question and say, "What's your favorite movie?" And it start a conversation. And I love that people use that tool, and it's sort of the norm to do that at camp, but it's not really normally in life. So, so a couple things that this is another thing I read about in The Art of Gathering. And then of course I did a internet search for it, but an idea was that she put in the book was the idea of providing a conversation menu for people. And so that could look like I looked up some samples, and it would be like, for the appetizer, you can choose to either ask one or two, you can choose one of the questions to answer with like your partner across the table. And for the entree, same thing. And for dessert. So I liked this. And then I looked, and they have different conversation menus, like in a book or in this format where it's like honest, you can buy conversation menus, but I feel like you can make them too. But I loved this idea, is like, say you were hosting a dinner party, instead of putting a menu out with what you're eating, put a conversation menu that is like, that's
I was just thinking that I know we don't have any weddings we're planning in the near future, but how fun would that have been at one of our weddings on the menu to have a different question?
Yes.
Like starter, how do you know the couple?
Absolutely. So good.
And then, I don't know, it could get a little deeper as you got into the meal.
Yes.
But, or
so
like,
good.
Maybe I'll do it for like her birthday or something.
Yes.
Yeah. That would be really fun.
I think exactly. And you could make it appropriate to the occasion or not. But, they also there's all those like table topics cards and everything like that. But I will just say that it's I'm just reiterating something that I've said many times before. It's a great way to connect with people. I have a whole post about Arthur Aaron's 36 questions to get closer to someone you love. It actually, his was originally called 36 questions, like something to like help you fall in love or something like that. And he got complete strangers together for these 45 minutes of answering these questions, like levels 1, 2, and 3. And people after 45 minutes claimed that they knew this person better than anyone else in their life, which is crazy. But it was just because they shared, hopes and dreams and ideas and, embarrassments and all these things, right? So, so I guess just the bottom line with that one is there an opportunity that you have, whether it's just with one person or with your family or your work group, to maybe have a question you each answer every week, or a choice of questions that you answer, or something that helps you connect and get to know each other better?
That sounds like a great idea. And I think we could even take those 36 questions, and every night at the dinner table, or at the beginning of a meeting, you could start with one question and everyone could share. And just imagine how much closer you'd feel as a team or family.
For sure.
After a couple weeks.
Okay. Well, that's what I have for this week and this podcast episode. I'm sure I will continue diving into this and continue sharing. But Gretchen, thanks for chatting with me. This has been so much fun.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Sunshine Parenting Podcast. As always, you can find notes and links about this episode on my website at sunshine-parenting.com. If you enjoyed the episode, I'd appreciate you passing it along to a friend or giving Sunshine Parenting a rating and review on iTunes. If you enjoy listening to my voice talking to you, my book, Happy Campers: 9 Summer Camp Secrets for Raising Kids Who Become Thriving Adults, is now available on Audible. Thanks for listening and have a great rest of your day. Here's to raising a generation of thriving adults and being a generation of thriving adults.